If I had known that the man who stepped into the glow of my campfire that night hadn't been seen by anyone alive for over 50 years, I would have kicked dirt over the flames, grabbed my pack, and vanished into the trees. But I didn't know. I only saw a silhouette approaching, steady and human, and at the time that felt like its own kind of comfort. I had no idea I was about to share a drink with someone who shouldn't have been there at all. It was supposed to be a quiet night, a solo outing, nothing ambitious. I'd set my tent up just before dusk, gathered a small pile of wood, and let the fire take shape. The sky above the mountains had already sunk into a deep blue, and the cold was settling hard, the kind that made a sip of bourbon feel like a reward you'd earned. I sat close to the warmth, boots stretched out, letting the flames erase the silence of the trail. That was when I heard the footsteps, not crashing, not stumbling, just a steady tread, deliberate enough that it didn't sound like an animal. I stiffened. The fire cracked, sending sparks upward, and the footsteps stopped right at the edge of its reach. A man stepped forward. His clothes struck me first. Nothing dramatic, nothing theatrical, just old. A canvas jacket a few decades out of style, laced leather boots worn smooth, and a wide-brimmed hat that looked more suited to an old hiking manual than a modern trail. He raised a hand in greeting. "Evening," he said, voice calm. "Saw your flyer from below. I've got my tent set up down the slope, about a mile from here. Thought I'd say hello." The way he spoke was polite, almost formal, like someone who'd grown up rehearsing courtesy. I nodded, masking my surprise. "Sure," I said. "If you want to warm up, have a seat." I held out my flask. "Bourbon?" He hesitated only a second, then lowered himself onto a rock and took a careful sip, as if tasting something rare. "Appreciated," he murmured. We talked. At first, the usual things hikers bring up: weather, trail conditions, long days on foot. But something felt off. His phrasing was old-fashioned, not in an eccentric way, but in the sense that every sentence felt like it had been carried out of an earlier decade. At one point, I pulled out my phone to check the time. The screen lit up, and he recoiled slightly, eyes widening. What is that thing?" He leaned in, fascinated. "May I see it? Just for a moment?" I shrugged and let him hold it. He turned it in his hand slowly, like he'd never touched a device like it before. Maybe he hadn't. I figured he was just one of those off-the-grid types who lived with minimal tech. Happens all the time out here. I didn't think twice. Midnight crept up on us. The fire sank lower, and the air grew tighter with cold. He stood, brushing off his jacket. "I should head back," he said. "Long walk down." "Sure, safe hike back." He nodded, lifted a dim flashlight, one of those old models with a narrow, yellow beam, and stepped into the darkness until the trees swallowed him completely. I listened for his footsteps, long after they faded. Something about them didn't sit right. They didn't sound like a 1-mile walk. They sounded like someone leaving, far, far deeper into the night. And for reasons I couldn't explain, sleep didn't come easily after that. Morning came slowly, the kind of gray-blue dawn that makes the world look unfinished. I stepped out of my tent feeling groggy, my thoughts still snagged on the stranger's voice, his oddly formal phrasing, the dim beam of his flashlight disappearing into the woods. I tried to shake it off. People act strange in the mountains all the time. Long days, isolation, exhaustion. They twist conversations, bend behavior. But the memory clung like burrs to wool. I packed up my camp and started down the trail. I needed to head in the same general direction he'd said his campsite was, so I figured I'd glance around as I went. Not to confront him or anything, just to reassure myself that he was real in the way people are supposed to be real. A tent, a campfire ring, footprints, something. The slope dropped steeply, weaving between pine trunks and patches of undergrowth. If he truly camped about a mile down, his setup should have been easy enough to spot. Campsites leave marks. Flattened grass, disturbed soil, scraps of paracord, the faint smell of old smoke. But as I scanned the terrain, nothing seemed out of place. The forest looked untouched, like no one had stepped there in weeks. I kept descending. Still nothing. A mile passed. Then a little more. No tent, no path, not even a scuffed footprint in the soft dirt. I frowned. Maybe I'd drifted off course. Maybe he'd pointed in a direction I misinterpreted in the dark. But the way he'd said it, down the slope, about a mile, it was too straightforward to mistake. And the mountain here funneled hikers into predictable lines. Even beginners left traces without meaning to. I stopped near a dry stream bed, listening. The woods were silent, except for a distant jay calling once, then disappearing. It felt wrong to keep searching, as if I was intruding on a place that didn't want to give me answers. I turned back toward the trail. A few hours later, with the sun higher and my pack heavier than it should have felt, I reached the small ranger station, a familiar wooden cabin with a porch that always smelled like old coffee and pine sap. My friend, Ranger Tom Bennett, stepped out as soon as he saw me approaching. "Well, look who survived another trip," he said, grinning. "Coffee? You look like you need it." I won't say no. We went inside. The heater hummed softly, and Tom poured 2 steaming cups. I took a long sip, letting the warmth settle into my bones. Maybe it was the comfort of routine, or maybe the lack of sleep, but the story of the stranger spilled out of me before I could decide whether to sound casual or concerned. Tom's smile faded halfway through. "Hold on," he said, setting his mug down. "You're not the first person to tell me something like this." My stomach tightened. "What do you mean, something like this?" He leaned forward. "Describe him. Clothing, age, anything you remember." I replayed the scene in my head. The canvas jacket, the worn leather boots, the wide-brimmed hat, the careful politeness in his voice. I described him exactly as I had seen him. Tom's expression hardened. Without speaking, he stood, crossed the room, and pulled a weathered folder from a filing cabinet. He opened it slowly, almost reluctantly, and removed a single photograph. Then he set it in front of me. I felt my chest go hollow. It was him, the man from the fire. The same posture, the same face, the same calm, observant eyes. Tom exhaled. That man disappeared in these mountains over 50 years ago. I didn't touch the photograph at first. I just stared, unable to reconcile the man in the picture with the one who had warmed his hands by my fire only hours earlier. Same jacket, same worn boots, same calm, steady eyes. The only thing aged was the paper. "You're sure this is him?" I finally asked. Tom nodded. "Missing for 53 years, Northern Ridge. Search crews never found a campsite or gear. Just a few prints leading into a ravine, and then nothing." A hard swallow stuck in my throat. "Has anyone else seen him?" "3 hikers, Tom said. "Always the same story. He approaches their camp at night, talks for a bit, disappears before dawn." He paused. "But you're the first who talked with him that long. The first he seemed comfortable around." A cold weight settled in my chest. He wasn't some apparition, Tom. He drank with me. He held my phone. He reacted like... I stopped. The moment replayed sharply. He didn't even know what a phone was. Tom exhaled. Someone from the 1970s wouldn't. It made sense, but did nothing to untangle the knot in my gut. I stood and looked out the window. Pines swayed under a thin strip of sky, quiet and ordinary. Yet somewhere in that vast stretch of forest was the exact place where I had sat across from a man whose story should have ended decades before I was born. Tom spoke again, his voice low. "You're not in danger. No one who's seen him ever was. But running into something like this, something that doesn't fit, it shakes people, makes them question their own memory." He hesitated. "Just remember, this mountain keeps its old stories alive longer than we do." Comforting or not, I couldn't argue. I thanked him and stepped outside. The crisp air hit my face, clearing my thoughts, but not the dread beneath them. I started down the gravel path, boots crunching rhythmically, but my mind stayed locked on the night before. The firelight on his jacket, the careful way he handled the phone, the old flashlight beam disappearing between the trees. None of it felt wrong at the time, only misplaced, like he'd stepped out of a page instead of a trail. At the bend in the road, I stopped and looked back toward the ridgeline, back toward the place where our paths crossed. For a moment, I imagined him walking through the pine shadows, following routes he'd memorized half a century earlier, still searching for the camp he once called his own. Maybe still trying to go home. I turned and kept moving. My pack felt heavier now, not from gear, but from the truth settling in. I hadn't shared a fire with a stranger. I'd shared it with someone whose disappearance never ended, and maybe never will.